topic of inequity plugging the global North and South science partnerships is nothing new. Probably you know a lot about it. Indeed, investment in strengthening the research excellence of African universities has been prioritized by high-level organizations such as the European Union, national strategies, and international donors. It is argued that these partnerships between the North and the South are promoted as a means to enhance African scholarship and address African-specific societal challenges. That's why they are promoted. More recently, there have been some attempts to support African institutions to lead these collaborations. But I argue that this shift in funding practices is rare and is not the panacea. Why is not the panacea the way we are working, actually? Because the form and functioning of such programs are hardly an accident. They are predictable in the distribution of resources and outcomes, and they are the symptom of deeper structural inequalities between the North and the South, and these inequalities are manifest in different ways. For instance, partnerships between the North and the South are shaped by the agendas of the funding bodies, which often are not the same that the agendas on the Global South needs. Their organizational cultures with value, particular ways of producing evidence or particular ways of knowing, and the demands of the political environment. These partnerships are also shaped by the institutional structures of recipients, institutions which reflect some of the unequal functioning of the societies in which they are embedded. And I'm going to give you more examples now. So this commentary, this talk here, is inspired by our experience of working in one such a project, bringing different collaborations between the North and the South. And as Tali explained, the funding came from the Global North, and it is led by an African institution. Our experience of the challenges of implementing this logistically complex project has led us to reflect on the unequal structural patterns of organization, funding, and capacity that shape the way we have been able to work. In the course of these reflections, we were struck by the extent to which these experiences were shared by other African colleagues, and also how they resonated with the experience of the African colleagues that had years and years and years of experience working. So we thought that the best way of actually capturing this was inviting all the co-Is into a workshop in Makanda and actually work on it and start thinking and putting it on paper, actually, because what it said, it counts. So I want to emphasize here, because I am quite brutish, ruthless when I speak, but I want to emphasize here that this text, this commentary, is not a critique of the funding body or of our project. It's more a critique of the wider context that shapes research in the Global South. This is work in progress, and I think this is an amazing space for discussion, critical discussion, and getting your insights and feedback. To talk about the different forms of inequalities, I'm going to draw on Michelle Vaughan's beautiful quotation. She has a small, beautiful quotation, and I'm going to use it to unpack those three forms of structural inequalities that shape dynamics between the North and the South. So, she says, equality is equal treatment. Everybody gets the same. Equity is fair treatment. Support is given on the basis of need. However, if you start from a place of disadvantage and are then treated equally as a person with advantage, you perpetuate and ultimately grow the gap between the two of you. Actually, this is really important. You should use this whenever you do an intervention to make sure you are not widening inequalities. So this is really important. This is my public health hat in here. So you need equitable measures first to close the gap between the poorest and the richest, or the privileged and the less privileged, and then get everybody to be on the same level play field. How does this apply to the African, the North-South relationships in terms of research? So, historical socioeconomic inequalities in Africa, many of which have its roots in the colonial and post-colonial past, underlie many of the inequalities in research resources within the continent. Despite the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa, that has been putting a lot of money in research infrastructure since 2015, we see there is a lot of work that needs to be done. In fact, a needs assessment of 7 African countries show that underinvestment in research infrastructure is still a big thing. So these structural financial inequalities put national research systems and institutions in a place of disadvantage. So already Africa is starting from a point of disadvantage in the research competition. So these are some of the examples that our colleagues are emphasizing once and again. So for instance, research staff in the Global South have lower salaries, which put them in enormous pressures to top up their salaries with extra work, extra projects, which adds on the burden of work they have. Lack of funding leaves institutions unable to hire, strengthen, and retain experts in management, human resources, and administration of larger grants. This is a big issue. Underfunding also impacts on ability to acquire state-of-the-art equipment, collect data that can translate into manuscripts with thinner data, and something. Can I move this with a hand? No. It's okay. Also, astronomical international journal fees puts Global South researchers at a disadvantage when they want to publish. So there are some issues here that already Global South institutions are starting from a point of disadvantage. So, again, I'm quoting Michelle Bogans to explain the second form of structural inequality. She says, if you are a woman in business, odds are that you have been or you are subject to microaggressions and maybe even over discrimination that has impacted you in a negative way at some point in your career. Here, I am comparing women and gender with Africa, with the situation, but I hope the metaphor helps. So in this commentary, we use the concept of microaggression symbolically to refer to the direct consequences of neocolonialism and racism in reproducing and maintaining asymmetrical power relations between the North and the South. The important topics of cognitive extractivism and labor exploitations are very well studied. So here you have, I think it's a very, very accurate cartoon of what is happening of some of those dynamics. So the big boss says, interesting project. If Mr. Mamadou could leave us alone, I would like to discuss some of strictly personal matters. And the white colleague there sitting says, Mamadou is my southern counterpart. We have been collaborating for 25 years. You can speak in front of him. He's a co-author on this project. So these cartoons represent quite well those dynamics between South. So as I say, cognitive extractivism and labor exploitation is very widely commented. But in the project, we discovered that there is another pernicious culture of distrust that is manifested in 2 ways. So first, Global South colleagues, in particular our African colleagues, they were talking about too much scrutiny, too much scrutiny. Everything we do is like looked, with a big magnifying glances. I have a quotation here from a senior COI, and she was saying, I was asked to present proof of who I was having coffee with in my travel overseas. My UK colleague said that no UK colleague had to give that information. And there are other instances of that too much scrutiny. Second, despite rhetorical efforts to develop equitable rather than global relationships, successful bids highlight the dominance of global north leading partnerships. And this is what I'm going to say. I don't have evidence yet. I'm looking for it. But the gut feeling is that from the limited occasions that grants are awarded to the global south or to African institutions, big part of them come to South Africa. So I will dare to say that the idea is that only white people are to be trusted here. I need to find the evidence and the numbers, but that's what that's what is being suggested in here. And the final form of inequality, following Michel's Bogan, is that when the tides suddenly turn and you are given an opportunity to compete equally for something, you are still operating from a baseline that has been disadvantaged. So let's say that Global South research institutions are starting now from an equal starting point, but you have all that legacy, all that history that is already preventing you from being at the very top there. So we argue that if research is going to be led by student research institutions, we argue that if research led by student research institutions is to remain an investment priority, there is a need to recognize the asymmetrical global north and south funding and working dynamics. And we need to develop enabling supporting mechanisms to overcome and mitigate the real impact of these compounding inequalities. So we hope this space, some of you are like, wow, we hope that this space serves to have that critical, radical, open debate and thinking what are those mechanisms that we could suggest and put forward, not on a national level or on a level of your institutions, but how can we do on an international level to start mitigating those global South asymmetrical power relations. And that's me. Thank you.